They called me thorough. For 19 years I maintained the reliquary archives of Subsector Obscurus, cataloging the personal effects of Imperial Saints, cross-referencing martyrdom dates with relic authenticity, verifying chain of custody for items deemed touched by the Emperor's grace. I processed 743 Saint dossiers in those years, each one a testament to unwavering faith and glorious sacrifice. My work kept the faithful connected to those who had gone before, who had proven their devotion in blood and fire. I took pride in that connection. I believed I served the Emperor by preserving their memory. My name is Matthias Kane, and I want you to understand something crucial before I tell you what I found. I loved my work. I loved the Imperium. I believed every word of every litany I recited at the morning consecration bells. What I discovered did not make me a heretic. It made me awake. And in the Imperium, there is no greater sin than awakening. The reliquary archives were housed in the sub-levels of the Cathedral of Eternal Vigilance on Scintilla, maintained at precisely 11 degrees Celsius to preserve the parchment and textiles that comprised our collection. The cold was constant, penetrating, the kind that settled into your bones after the first year and never left. I wore the standard gray robes of the administratum, archival corpse, heavy wool that smelled of preservation chemicals and sanctified incense. 317 other catalogers worked in the archives, each assigned to specific categories. My specialization was personal documentation, journals, letters, final testaments, anything written in the saint's own hands. My days followed the Emperor's order with mechanical precision. The consecration bells rang at the 6th hour, and I would rise from my HAB unit 3 levels above the archives, dress in the darkness, and descend the brass spiral staircase that had been worn smooth by 10,000 years of faithful feet. The morning prayer took exactly 17 minutes, recited in unison with my fellow archivists in the Chapel of Preservation. The words were comfort themselves, a rhythmic certainty that organized the universe into comprehensible hierarchy. The Emperor protects. The Emperor provides. The faithful serve. The heretic burns. Simple. True. Unquestionable. My workstation was positioned in Gallery Theta. Row 47, Station 12, a designation I could recite in my sleep. The desk was ancient oak, scarred by centuries of use, fitted with a reading lamp that cast warm light across whatever document I examined. My tools were simple magnification lenses, authentication stamps, cross-reference codices, and the data slate that connected to the central archive system. I would arrive at station 33 minutes into the 7th hour, log my attendance, and begin processing whatever items had been delivered overnight from acquisition teams across the sector. The work required absolute precision. Each saint's documentation had to be verified for authenticity, cross-referenced against official church records, dated according to the imperial calendar, and filed within the appropriate categorical system. A letter from Saint Celestine required different handling than a battlefield journal from a lesser-known canonized warrior. Provenance chains had to be traced backward through sometimes centuries of custody changes. Authentication marks had to be examined under magnification, compared against known examples, verified against forgery patterns. One mistake could contaminate the archive's integrity. One misattribution could lead the faithful astray. I was good at my work, exceptional. My supervisor, Archivist Tertius Yolan, told me during my annual review in year 14. My authentication rejection rate was 0.03%, the lowest in Gallery Theta. I had personally verified the authenticity of the tears of Saint Arabella, a vial of crystallized salt water collected from her cheeks before her martyrdom. I had cataloged the final prayer of Saint Christus, written in his own blood on parchment made from his flayed skin. I had held in my hands the rosary of Saint Dominica, each bead carved from the bone of a different Xenos she had slain in personal combat. These were not just historical artifacts. They were connections to the divine, proof that mortal flesh could achieve transcendence through absolute faith. The archive maintained strict protocols. No eating or drinking within 5 meters of any document. White cotton gloves worn at all times when handling materials. Atmospheric controls monitored hourly. Each item examined in designated containment fields to prevent contamination. Conversation was discouraged but not forbidden, provided it remained professional and did not disturb concentration. The Vox system would occasionally crackle with announcements, procurement notifications, or mandatory prayer reminders, but otherwise Gallery Theta existed in focused silence, broken only by the rustle of turning pages and the scratch of authentication styluses on data slates. I remember the day with absolute clarity, though I could not have known then that it was the hinge upon which my entire life would turn. It was the 43rd day of the 3rd month in the year. I had served for 19 standard years. The morning had been routine. Morning consecration at the 6th hour. Descent to Gallery Theta at the appointed time. 3 items awaited processing at my station, delivered sometime during the night shift. The first was a prayer book from a minor saint, whose name I have since forgotten. The second was a collection of correspondence between Saint Vallius and his spiritual advisor. The third was a leather-bound journal, cracked with age, its pages yellowed but remarkably preserved. The acquisition manifest listed it as journal, Saint Alaric the Unyielding, personal, dating approximately 337, M39 to 34139, recovery site Shrine World of Temperance Prime, archive sub-level 7, sealed container, authentication status pending. The journal had been discovered 3 months prior during expansion work on a shrine dedicated to the martyrs of the Cerberus Crusade. The container had been sealed with wax bearing the mark of the ecclesiarchy, dated to shortly after Saint Alaric's disappearance in 341. M39. No one had opened it in 7 millennia. I unsealed the containment field and lifted the journal carefully, supporting its spine to prevent stress on the binding. The leather was dark, almost black, worn smooth by handling. No decorative elements, no gilt edges, no ostentation. The pages were vellum, expensive quality, and the text was written in precise Gothic script, ink faded to brown but still legible. I opened to the first page, expecting the usual religious exposition, declarations of faith, prayers for the emperor's guidance. Instead, I found a date and a single sentence. 3rd day of campaigning against the Valithi heretics. The executions began today. Not a prayer, not a declaration, a statement of fact, flat and observational. I noted this in my preliminary assessment, but thought little of it. Many saints had served as warriors or inquisitors. Documentation of campaign activities was standard. I continued reading, following protocol, examining the handwriting for consistency, checking the ink composition against known samples from the period, verifying the vellum age through spectral analysis. Everything authenticated correctly. This was genuine, written in Alaric's own hand. The early entries were what I expected. Alaric had been assigned to root out heretical elements among the population of Valithi, minor world in what was then the Cerberus sector. He wrote with the confidence of absolute certainty, describing his mission as divinely ordained, his purpose as clear as the emperor's own will. We are the instruments of his judgment. One entry read, "Through us, he cleanses the unclean, purifies the corrupt, guides humanity back to righteousness." Standard doctrine, eloquently expressed. The faith was evident on every page, but there were details that caught my attention, small things that didn't align with the hagiographies I had read. Saint Alaric the Unyielding was remembered as a beacon of mercy, a warrior priest who had converted thousands through the power of his preaching, who had wept for the souls he could not save. The official church records described him as compassionate, firm but fair, a man who wielded faith as precisely as others wielded blades. The journal, however, described something different. Today we executed 37 suspected cultists in the central square. The evidence was conclusive. Prohibited texts found in their possession. Marks of chaos observed in their HAB units. testimony from informants regarding secret meetings. The sentences were just. The Emperor's law demands death for heresy, and we delivered his judgment without hesitation. The crowd watched in proper silence. Fear maintains order where reason fails. I read that passage 3 times. Fear maintains order where reason fails. It was a strange sentiment for a saint remembered for his compassion. But perhaps the hagiographies had emphasized certain aspects of his character while downplaying others. Saints were human before their canonization, subject to the same struggles and evolution as any faithful servant. I made a note in my analysis. Early entries reflect pre-canonization mindset, emphasis on justice over mercy. Character development likely occurs in later entries as spiritual maturity increases. I continued cataloging, working through the journal methodically. Alaric's campaign on Valithi lasted approximately 6 months, during which he systematically identified and eliminated heretical elements. His entries became increasingly detailed regarding procedures, how suspects were identified, what constituted evidence, how trials were conducted. The writing remained precise, almost clinical, documenting methods with the same care I used to catalog relics. Midway through the Valithi campaign, I encountered an entry that made me pause. The child testified against her parents. She is 11. She reported that they kept a book hidden beneath the floor panels, a book with strange symbols that made her head hurt when she looked at them. We found the book. It was a ledger, a financial ledger from their trading business, written in low Gothic with accounting annotations. The symbols that hurt her head were numbers. She could not read. We executed the parents anyway. The child has been reassigned to a Schola Progenium facility. She will be taught to read, to recognize actual heresy. In 6 years, she will understand what she did to her parents. I do not know if that understanding will be mercy or cruelty. I sat back in my chair, the journal resting on the desk before me. The cold air of Gallery Theta suddenly felt colder. I read the passage again, searching for something I had missed, some indication that this was metaphorical or that I had misunderstood the context. But the words were clear. The parents had been innocent. Alaric knew they were innocent. He executed them anyway. My training asserted itself. This required context. Saints operated under different pressures than ordinary clergy. Perhaps there were factors not documented in the journal. Perhaps the parents had committed other offenses not mentioned. Perhaps the execution served a larger purpose that became clear in retrospect. I marked the passage for further investigation and continued reading, looking for clarification. The entries that followed did not provide reassurance. They provided pattern. Executed 14 citizens for possessing Xenos artifacts. The artifacts were decorative shells from off-world traders, approved for commerce by the Administratum. But they came from a Xenos species, and possession of Xenos materials can be interpreted as heresy under subsection 19 of the Articles of Faith. The law is written broadly for good reason. Flexibility in interpretation allows us to act decisively when uncertainty would be paralyzing. The Merchant Guild protested the execution of their members. They produced commerce licenses, tax records, proof of imperial citizenship, all valid. I had them arrested for obstruction of ecclesiastical authority. 3 were executed. The protests stopped. Today I ordered the burning of a district where heretical activity had been reported. Investigation confirmed no heresy, only rumor. But rumor itself is dangerous. It spreads uncertainty, creates doubt, undermines faith. Better to burn a clean district and confirm the Emperor's vigilance than to leave any possibility of corruption. 41,000 souls. I signed the order without hesitation. This is what faith demands. My hands were shaking. I set the journal down carefully, removed my reading gloves, pressed my palms flat against the cold oak desk. 41,000 people, burned alive because of unconfirmed rumors. This could not be correct. I had misread something. I had to have misread something. I activated my data slate and accessed the central archive system. searching for references to Saint Alaric's campaign on Valithi. The official church records painted a different picture. They described a successful purge of a world tainted by chaos, praising Alaric's unwavering dedication and decisive action. They listed casualties: 17,000 heretics executed, 12,000 cultists killed in resistance. The numbers were presented as evidence of the world's corruption, proof of how deeply the taint had spread. But Alaric's journal listed over 73,000 executions. I had been counting as I read, making notes in my processing file. 73,816, to be precise. He documented each batch, sometimes with names, always with numbers. And a significant portion, perhaps a third, were described as questionable at best, innocent at worst. I looked around Gallery Theta. 317 catalogers, all bent over their work, all processing the evidence of saints' lives, all maintaining the connections between the faithful and the faithful dead. None of them looked troubled. None of them questioned what they read. Why would they? This was the reliquary archives. We preserved truth. We authenticated sanctity. We would never catalog anything that contradicted the Emperor's justice. But I held in my cotton-gloved hands a journal that did exactly that. The logical part of my mind, the part that had been trained through 19 years of archival precision, began constructing explanations. Perhaps Alaric had been troubled by doubt, had recorded his sins as penance, had later repented and achieved sanctity through that repentance. Perhaps the journal was a record of his darkness before his enlightenment. Perhaps the hagiographies focused on his later actions after Valithi, when he had learned mercy through the horror of his earlier cruelty. I searched for records of Alaric's later campaigns. There were 3 more worlds listed before his disappearance in 341. M39, Corvax, Tertium, Gast, all recorded as successful purges of heretical populations, all listed with casualty numbers that matched the official records precisely. No journals had been recovered from those campaigns. I returned to the Valithi journal, forcing myself to continue. Professional duty demanded completion of authentication. I could not halt processing because the content disturbed me. Many historical documents contained disturbing content. The galaxy was not gentle. Faith was not achieved without suffering. I would finish the authentication, note any discrepancies in my report, and allow my superiors to determine appropriate classification. The middle section of the journal covered the final months of the Valithi campaign. Alaric's entries became shorter, more perfunctory, as if the daily executions had become routine enough to warrant only brief documentation. But scattered among the brief notations were longer entries, moments where he seemed to step back and examine what he was doing. I prayed for 3 hours today, seeking confirmation that this path is righteous. The Emperor did not answer. He never answers. But his silence is itself a form of guidance. If we were straying from his will, he would send signs, would intervene, would turn his face from us. We continue to succeed. The heretics fall. Order is maintained. Therefore, our actions must be aligned with his divine plan. Faith does not require certainty. It requires action despite uncertainty. I understood that logic. It was sound. If the Emperor disapproved of actions taken in his name, he would manifest that disapproval. Success itself was evidence of righteousness. This was fundamental doctrine, preached in every chapel, taught in every scala. Why, then, did it feel hollow reading it in Alaric's handwriting? The Valithi campaign concludes tomorrow. Of the world's population of 4 million, approximately 370,000 remain. The rest have been executed, purged, or died in the systematic cleansing of the Hab districts. Governor Malthius has been replaced by Administrator Carr, a man of unquestionable faith and acceptable competence. The world will rebuild. The survivors will remember. Their children will be born into a society that understands the cost of straying from the Emperor's light. This is how faith is maintained, through memory of consequence, through generational trauma that becomes cultural instinct. In 200 years, Valithi will be the most loyal world in the sector. I have purchased that loyalty with blood and fire. Generational trauma, cultural instinct, purchased loyalty. These were not the words of a compassionate shepherd guiding his flock. These were the words of someone who understood exactly what he was creating and why. The final entries from Valithi were brief administrative notes, transfer orders, personnel reassignments. And then, a single line before the next campaign began. I am 28 years old. I have killed more people than I can remember. When I close my eyes, I see their faces. When I sleep, I hear them. The Emperor demands I continue. So I continue. 28. He had been 28 years old. Younger than I was now. I had spent 19 years cataloging saints. He had spent some portion of his youth creating them through slaughter. I should have stopped reading then. I should have filed the journal as authenticated, noted the discrepancies, and allowed the system to function as designed. But I could not. Something had broken in me, some certainty that had held my worldview together. I needed to know if this horror had led somewhere, if Alaric's later campaigns showed growth, wisdom, mercy. I needed the narrative to justify itself. The Korvax entries began with a familiar phrase. Second day of campaigning against the Korvax heretics. The executions began today. Korvax lasted 4 months. Tertium lasted 7. Gast lasted 11. The patterns were consistent across all 3 worlds. Initial investigation, identification of suspects, expansion of suspect pool as evidence became more loosely defined. Systematic execution of anyone who could be connected to heresy through increasingly tenuous chains of association. Family members, business partners, neighbors, anyone who failed to report suspicious behavior, anyone who defended the accused, anyone who questioned the proceedings. But it was the Gast campaign where the journal revealed something that changed everything. I thought I understood about the Imperium I served. Alaric had been investigating a suspected cult on Gast when he made an unusual entry. I received communication today from Inquisitor Valdane. He congratulated me on the success of the previous campaigns and informed me that I am being considered for canonization. The Church believes my work demonstrates sufficient faith and dedication to warrant sainthood. Valdane explained the political value of a living saint who demonstrates uncompromising zeal. He said the Imperium requires symbols of absolute faith to counter the creeping tolerance and philosophical weakness he observes in the ecclesiarchy. I am to be that symbol. I read that 3 times. He was being considered for canonization while still alive, while still conducting campaigns that he himself documented as morally questionable at best. The next entry was longer. I met with Inquisitor Valdane in person. He is not what I expected. He is 74 years old, augmented to extend his service life, and exhausted in a way that transcends physical fatigue. His hands shake when he holds his Aquila pendant. He told me something I was not prepared to hear. He told me that the purges, all of them, across hundreds of worlds, are not aberrations or corruptions of imperial justice. They are policy. Deliberate, systematic, calculated policy designed to maintain control through fear. My vision blurred. I blinked, refocused on the page, continued reading. Valdane showed me the texts. They are not secret, he said. They are simply not discussed. The doctrine of necessary severity. The principles of population management. The treatises on fear as governance. Written by the inquisitorial conclave. By the High Lords themselves. By administrators and strategists who have calculated the precise level of terror required to keep a sector compliant. The purges happen on schedule, not in response to actual heresy, but as maintenance, like servitor updates or infrastructure inspections. They select worlds at random, manufacture evidence if necessary, and conduct cleansing operations to remind adjacent systems what defiance costs. I pushed back from my desk, the chair scraping against stone. Several nearby catalogers glanced up, irritated by the noise. I ignored them, staring at the journal, at words written 7,000 years ago by a man the Imperium had declared a saint. I asked Valdane why. Why kill millions if they are innocent? He looked at me with those exhausted eyes and said, because mercy does not scale. Because fear is the only governance tool that works across 10,000 worlds. Because humanity's greatest enemy is not Xenos or chaos, but humanity itself. We are fractious, independent, prone to rebellion and philosophical drift. The Imperium is held together by terror, not love, not faith, not shared purpose. Terror, and someone must be willing to generate that terror. I have done it for half a century. Now it is your turn. The cold of Gallery Theta had never felt so absolute. I was shaking, not from temperature, but from the complete restructuring of reality occurring in my mind. 19 years. 19 years I had cataloged the evidence of saints' lives, had authenticated their sacrifices, had helped maintain the connection between the faithful and their exemplars. And all of it, every word, every relic, every hagiography, was constructed on a foundation of calculated slaughter. I forced myself to continue reading, though part of me wanted to close the journal, reseal it, file it as authenticated without comment. But I could not unsee what I had seen. I could not unknow what I knew. Alaric's entries after his meeting with Valdane changed in tone. The clinical documentation remained, but now there were philosophical passages, attempts to rationalize what he had been told. I have thought constantly about Valdane's words for 17 days. I cannot dismiss them. The evidence supports his claims. I have conducted purges on 4 worlds, and in each case, the adjacent systems showed increased compliance with imperial edicts, decreased resistance to taxation, reduced incidence of cultural independence. The slaughter works. It achieves its intended purpose. The question, then, is not whether the policy succeeds, but whether success justifies the cost. I spoke with Preacher Joan, seeking spiritual guidance without revealing what I know. He told me that faith requires trust in the Emperor's plan, even when that plan involves suffering we cannot understand. He said that mortal comprehension is limited, that what appears cruel may be mercy in the eternal calculation only the Emperor perceives. But Joan does not know. He has not read into the texts. He believes the purges are responses to actual heresy. His faith is built on a lie that I now cannot forget. Valdane told me something else. He told me that the Imperium has functioned this way for 10,000 years, that the Emperor himself, before his internment in the Golden Throne, conducted similar campaigns of calculated terror, that the Great Crusade was not merely about reuniting humanity, but about establishing such overwhelming dominance that no world would ever dare challenge Terra's authority, that the compliance actions, the examples made of resistant populations, were deliberate demonstrations of power designed to terrify entire sectors into submission. Valdane said, the Emperor understood that humanity required terror to survive. We continue his work. We are his true servants, those willing to bear the burden of necessary evil. I stood from my desk, walked to the refreshment alcove, poured myself water from the consecrated dispenser. My hands were steady through trained discipline, but my mind was fragmenting. Every certainty I had built my life upon was disintegrating under the weight of words, written by a man the Church had declared a saint. If Alaric was correct, if Valdane was correct, then the Imperium was not what I believed it to be. It was not a flawed system striving toward the Emperor's divine vision. It was a deliberate machine of oppression, designed to rule through fear, maintained through calculated atrocity. I returned to my station, to the journal, to the remainder of Alaric's testimony. The Ghast campaign entries became briefer as the purge progressed. 73,000 executed in the first month, 119,000 in the second. The numbers climbed. Alaric documented them without commentary, as if the internal debate had concluded and only procedure remained. But near the end of the Ghast campaign, he wrote an entry that revealed his final position. I have made my decision. Valdane is correct. The policy is deliberate, calculated, and effective. But he is also wrong. The cost is too high. Not in lives, though the lives matter. The cost is in what we become. I have killed over 2 million people across 4 worlds. I remember perhaps a few hundred of them. The rest are numbers, categories, statistical necessity. I have transformed myself into an instrument of systematic murder, and I have justified it with philosophy that sounds profound, but is ultimately hollow. Fear maintains order, yes, but it also maintains only the kind of order built on fear. It creates populations that are compliant but not faithful, obedient but not loyal, functional but spiritually dead. We are building an Imperium of corpses who happen to still breathe. I told Valdane I would not continue. He looked at me with something like relief, as if he had been waiting for someone to refuse, to prove that moral limit still existed somewhere in the machine. He said, "Then you understand the final lesson. Someone must be willing to say no, even if it costs everything. Especially if it costs everything. That is the only faith that matters." He helped me seal this journal. He arranged for it to be hidden. He told me that in 7,000 years, perhaps someone would find it. Perhaps that person would understand. Perhaps not. But the truth should exist somewhere, even if buried. The final entries were brief. I have requested reassignment to a frontier mission against confirmed Xenos threats. The request was denied. I have been informed that my canonization is proceeding. I will be declared a saint within the year. My refusal to continue the purges will be recorded as martyrdom, in service of the Emperor. The circumstances of my death will be classified. I do not know if I will actually be killed or simply disappeared, my identity erased. My life continued under a different name in some remote facility. It does not matter. The saint they create will not be me. It will be a symbol, a tool, an instrument of the policy I now oppose. To whoever finds this, I do not expect you to believe me without verification. I do not expect you to act on this knowledge. I only ask that you remember something I learned too late. Faith without questioning is not faith. It is obedience. And obedience that serves evil is not virtue. It is complicity. I was complicit. I told myself I served the Emperor, but I served a system that uses his name to justify horror. I cannot undo what I have done. I can only refuse to continue. That refusal will be erased from history. This journal is my only testimony. Do with it what conscience demands. The journal ended there. No dramatic final words, no grand declarations. Just a statement of refusal and a hope that someone, someday, would understand. I sat at my desk in Gallery Theta for a long time after finishing the journal, watching the other catalogers work, listening to the rustle of pages and the scratch of authentication styluses. They were doing what I had done for 19 years, preserving the evidence of saints' lives, maintaining the connections that kept the faithful bound to the Imperium's vision of itself. And none of them knew, or perhaps some of them knew, and had made the choice I now faced, whether to see what I had seen and continue anyway, or whether to see and refuse. I began searching the archives systematically, using my authentication clearance to access files that I normally would not examine. I was looking for pattern, for confirmation, for evidence that Alaric's journal was either an aberration or a revelation. I spent the next 47 days conducting what I later understood was my own investigation, though I would never have used that word at the time. I told myself I was simply being thorough, ensuring proper authentication, verifying context. I was lying to myself. I was searching for proof that the Imperium I had served was not what Alaric had described. I found the opposite. Saint Verentius, canonized in 673, M39, recorded for his compassionate leadership during the Scourge of Kelvin. His personal letters, sealed in Archive Container 771, described systematic extermination of populations that showed no evidence of chaos taint. "We must act decisively, even without certainty," he wrote. "The perception of our vigilance is more valuable than accuracy." Saint Cravalla, canonized in a 112, M40, celebrated for her mercy and her attempts to redeem the fallen. Her journal, which I authenticated in my 3rd year of service, contained passages I had read but not understood at the time. The redemption trials are theater. The verdicts are predetermined. But the population must believe that mercy is possible, even if it never actually materializes. Hope is a governance tool as valuable as fear. Saint Brennus, Saint Malcher, Saint Thessa, Saint Gorvain, 23 saints across 3,000 years. I examined their personal documentation, the materials that were sealed from public view, meant only for archival preservation, and in each case, I found the same pattern. Systematic purges justified by manufactured evidence. Executions conducted for political necessity rather than actual heresy. Authority figures who understood the system's true nature and participated anyway, because someone had to, because the alternative was perceived as worse. In the 71st day of my investigation, I found the texts Alaric had mentioned. They were not secret, exactly. They were simply filed in the restricted theology section, available to senior clergy and inquisitorial personnel. The Doctrine of Necessary Severity, written by High Inquisitor Valdane in 337, M139, the same Valdane who had spoken to Alaric. The text was dry, academic, philosophical. It made a case that still almost convinced me, even knowing what I knew. Humanity numbers in the trillions across 10,000 worlds. No system of governance based on voluntary compliance can maintain control across such scale. Distance makes enforcement inconsistent. Cultural drift makes populations incompatible. Independent thought makes rebellion inevitable. The only governance mechanism that transcends distance, culture, and independent thought is fear. Fear is universal. Fear is reliable. Fear can be manufactured, calibrated, and deployed with precision. The Imperium's survival depends not on love of the Emperor, but on terror of his wrath. We maintain that terror through systematic example-making, through purges that are calculated to remind populations of the cost of defiance. This is not corruption of imperial ideals. This is the only implementation of those ideals that functions at the scale required. I read the treatise 3 times. The logic was sound. The evidence was compelling. The conclusion was almost defensible. Almost. But not quite. Because the treatise assumed something that I could no longer accept as axiom, that the Imperium's survival justified any cost. That the system's continuation was worth the mountains of corpses required to maintain it. That fear-based governance was not merely necessary, but righteous. I searched for counter-arguments, for texts that challenged the doctrine. I found none in the archives, which itself was revealing. Either no one had challenged it in 7,000 years, or those challenges had been systematically removed from historical record. On the 93rd day of my investigation, Archivist Tertius Yolan summoned me to her office. She was 71 years old, augmented to extend her service life, a 40-year veteran of the reliquary archives. Her office was small, lined with texts, lit by candles rather than electric lamps. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. I sat. "You have been accessing unusual files," she said. Her voice was not accusatory, merely observational. "I have been conducting authentication research," I replied, falling back on professional protocol. The Saint Alaric journal required extensive cross-referencing. "You completed the Alaric authentication on day 6, she said. "You have been researching for 87 additional days, 23 separate Saint dossiers, 49 restricted theology texts, 12 inquisitorial policy documents. You are searching for something specific." "What?" I could have lied, should have lied, but something in her exhausted eyes, something in the way her augmetic hands trembled as she held her Aquila pendant, made me tell the truth. "I am trying to determine whether the Imperium I have served is worth serving," I said. She was quiet for a long time, watching me with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. "And what have you concluded?" she finally asked. "That it is not," I said. "That we maintain a system built on calculated atrocity. That the saints we venerate were tools of systematic oppression, some willing, some coerced, all complicit. That every prayer I have recited, Every authentication I have processed, every moment of faith I have experienced, has been in service of a lie designed to make horror palatable. Yolen nodded slowly, unsurprised by my answer. I was 41 when I learned, she said. A journal similar to Alaric's. Saint Curvala's private documentation. I spent 2 years investigating, just as you have spent 3 months. I found the same evidence. I reached the same conclusion. She paused, closed her eyes, breathed slowly. I have served in this archive for 29 years since that discovery. Do you know why? Because the alternative was death, I said. No, she said. Because the alternative was inaction. Matthias, the system you have discovered is monstrous. It is deliberate, calculated, and effective. It has maintained human survival across 10,000 years in a galaxy that actively seeks our extinction. The doctrine of necessary severity is correct in its central claim. Mercy does not scale. Voluntary compliance does not function across stellar distances. Fear-based governance is horrific, but the alternatives are either anarchic collapse or species extinction. So we simply accept it, I said, hearing the anger in my voice. We'll catalog the crimes and call them virtues. We maintain the lie because the truth is unbearable. We'll maintain the record, she said. Every journal, every letter, every private testimony that reveals the truth is preserved here. Not publicized, but preserved, so that the truth exists somewhere. So that someday, if humanity evolves beyond requiring terror for governance, the evidence will be available. We cannot change the system. We do not have that power, but we can preserve the truth within it. That is not enough, I said. I know, she said, and her voice broke slightly. I have told myself the same thing for 29 years, but I am still here, because someone must maintain this archive. Someone must ensure the truth is not erased entirely. I have made my choice. Now you must make yours. I stood. What are my options? You can continue as you have. Process the journals, authenticate the records, preserve the truth while participating in the system that generates it. You will live. You will serve. You will be complicit, but you will survive. Or you can refuse. You can attempt to expose what you have learned. You will be executed within 48 hours. Your documentation will be purged. Your name will be erased. The system will continue unchanged, and no one will remember that you tried. She paused, meeting my eyes. Or there is a third option. You can leave. Request transfer to somewhere remote, somewhere frontier, somewhere you will never again encounter evidence of the system's true nature. You can choose ignorance. Many do. I looked at her, at this woman who had carried the weight of truth for 29 years, who looked older than her augmented 71 years should allow, who trembled when she held her Aquila as if seeking comfort she no longer believed existed. How do you live with it? I asked. Poorly, she said. I do not sleep well. I have not slept well in 29 years. But I sleep better than I would if I had done nothing. And I sleep better than I would if I had been executed for futile resistance. This is the choice the system offers: complicit survival, futile martyrdom, or willful ignorance. There are no good options, only different flavors of horror. I left her office without answering. I returned to my station in Gallery Theta, to the cold air that smelled of preservation chemicals and sanctified incense, to the desk worn smooth by 10,000 years of faithful service. I sat there for 3 hours, not working, not thinking, just existing in the space between faith and comprehension, between duty and conscience. The other catalogers worked around me, undisturbed by my stillness. They processed their materials with the same care I had once brought to mine, authenticated their relics with the same precision, maintained the connections between the faithful and the system that required their faith for fuel. And none of them knew, or perhaps some of them knew, and had made the same choice Yolen had made to preserve truth while participating in horror. Because the alternatives were worse, I thought about my 19 years of service, 743 Saint dossiers, thousands of artifacts authenticated, decades spent helping maintain the mythology that kept the Imperium functioning. I had been good at my work, exceptional. My rejection rate was 0.03%. I had taken pride in that precision, that dedication, that service. And all of it, every moment, had been in support of a system that ground human souls into fuel for its continuation. But what was the alternative? If I refused, if I tried to expose the truth, I would be killed and forgotten. The system would continue. Nothing would change except that I would be dead. If I fled to ignorance, requested transfer somewhere, I would never encounter this knowledge again. I would spend the rest of my life knowing I had run from truth, because truth was unbearable. And if I stayed, if I continued as Yolin had continued, I would become what she had become, a person who preserved evidence of atrocity while participating in the system that generated it, sleeping poorly but sleeping, serving reluctantly but serving. There were no good options. I made my choice on the 104th day of my investigation. I accessed the Central Archive system and began compiling documentation. Every journal entry that contradicted official hagiography. Every private letter that revealed the truth behind sainthood. Every restricted theology text that explained the doctrine of necessary severity. I compiled it methodically, with the same precision I had brought to authentication, organizing it into a comprehensive file that demonstrated pattern across millennia. I included my own analysis, cross-references, authentication verification. I wanted anyone who read it to understand that this was not conspiracy theory or heretical interpretation. This was documented fact, verified through the same rigorous process the Imperium itself used to authenticate truth. I encrypted the file and prepared to transmit it to multiple locations, reformist elements within the ecclesiarchy, independent scholars, archival facilities on distant worlds. I knew the transmissions would be intercepted. I knew I would be identified. I knew the consequences, but I could not do nothing. I could not accept complicit survival or willful ignorance. If futile martyrdom was the only option that preserved my humanity, then I would choose futile martyrdom. I composed a brief message to accompany the documentation. To those who receive this, I am Archivist Matthias Kane of the Reliquary Archives, Subsector Obscurus. I have discovered evidence that the imperial system of governance is not corrupted by evil actors, but is deliberately designed to function through calculated terror. The purges, we are told, respond to heresy, are maintenance operations conducted on schedule to maintain population compliance through fear. The saints we venerate were instruments of this policy, some willing, some coerced, all complicit. This documentation proves these claims through authenticated archival sources. I do not expect this message to change the system. I only require that the truth exist somewhere beyond the archives that conceal it. Act according to conscience. I have acted according to mine. My finger hovered over the transmission command. One keystroke would send the file across the sector, would mark me for execution, would be my final act of defiance against a system I could no longer serve. I thought about Alaric, writing in his journal 7,000 years ago, choosing refusal over complicity, knowing it would cost everything. I thought about Yolin, carrying the weight of truth for 29 years, sleeping poorly but sleeping. I thought about the millions who had died in purges designed to maintain control, whose names existed only in classified files, whose deaths served no purpose except to terrify the living into submission. I pressed the command. The transmission lasted 17 seconds. I watched the progress indicator climb from 0 to 100%, watched the confirmation message appear, watched the system log my action with bureaucratic precision. Transmission complete. Multiple destinations. Archive stamp authenticated by Archivist Matthias Kane. Clearance level 7. Station Theta 4712. I felt nothing. Not relief, not fear, not regret. Just a vast emptiness where faith had been, where certainty had organized my universe into comprehensible hierarchy. The Emperor protects. The Emperor provides. The faithful serve. The heretic burns. Simple. True. Unquestionable. Except none of it was true. None of it had ever been true. And I had given 19 years to serving a lie that revealed itself with patient horror. The Arbits arrived 31 minutes later. 6 of them, in full combat armor, moving with practiced efficiency through Gallery Theta. The other catalogers looked up from their work, confused, afraid. The Arbits ignored them, walking directly to my station, weapons ready but not aimed. Their sergeant, a woman with augmetic eyes that clicked and whirred when they focused, examined me without expression. "Archivist Matthias Kane," she said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes," I said. "You are charged with heretical dissemination of classified materials, violation of archival confidentiality protocols, and sedition against the Imperium. You will come with us." I stood slowly, carefully, making no sudden movements. The catalogers watched in silence. Yolen was not among them. Perhaps she was in her office. Perhaps she had known this moment would come, and had absented herself to avoid witnessing it. Perhaps she would continue serving for another 29 years, preserving truth while participating in horror. Sleeping poorly but sleeping, they took me to Precinct Fortress 7, processed me through standard arrest procedures, confined me to a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and fear. I waited there for 41 hours before they came for interrogation. Not torture, not yet. Just questions, asked by an inquisitor whose name I never learned, whose face I barely remember. He wanted to know why. Why had I transmitted the files? What did I hope to accomplish? Did I understand the damage I had caused? I answered honestly. I told him I had discovered that the system was designed to function through calculated terror, that the Saints were instruments of systematic oppression, that I could not continue serving once I understood the truth. He listened without expression, making notes on a data slate, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I did not expect. "You are correct," he said. "Everything you transmitted is true. The doctrine of necessary severity is policy. The purges are maintenance operations. The Saints were tools. You authenticated the evidence properly. Your analysis is accurate." He set down his data slate, looked at me with exhausted eyes that reminded me of Yolen's. "So what did you think would happen when you revealed this truth?" "I thought people would know," I said. "I thought they deserved to know." "Why?" he asked. "What good does knowing accomplish? The system will not change. The purges will continue. The Saints will be venerated. The Imperium will function exactly as it has for 10,000 years. The only difference is that now, scattered individuals across the sector know the truth and are burdened by that knowledge. You have not saved anyone. You have not changed anything. You have simply spread suffering. The truth has value," I said, "even if it changes nothing." "The truth has value, Dawn, does it?" he said. "Or is truth simply another form of cruelty? Tell me, Archivist, if you could return to the moment before you opened Alaric's journal, before you learned what you learned, would you choose ignorance?" I thought about that question for a long time. Would I choose ignorance? Would I prefer to still believe in the Imperium I had served, to still recite my prayers with certainty, to still feel pride in my precision and dedication? Would I trade the horror of comprehension for the comfort of faith? No, I said finally. I would not choose ignorance. I would choose to know, even if knowing accomplishes nothing, even if knowing only makes me complicit in a different way. I would choose to know. He nodded slowly. Then you understand the final lesson. The system offers 3 choices: complicit ignorance, complicit knowledge, or futile resistance. You chose futile resistance. I respect that choice, but respect does not prevent consequence. He stood, gathered his data slate, moved toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. You asked Archivist Yolen how she lives with it. She told you poorly. Let me tell you how I live with it. I tell myself that the alternative is worse. That without the doctrine of necessary severity, without the calculated terror, Without the systematic purges, the Imperium would fracture into 10,000 independent systems that would war with each other until Xenos or chaos consumed them all. I tell myself that the mountains of corpses we generate are smaller than the mountains that would exist otherwise. I tell myself that choosing the lesser horror is the only moral option available. And then I sign the execution warrants and try to sleep. His hands were shaking. I do not know if I am right. I have never known. But someone must be willing to carry this burden. Someone must be willing to be the monster. I have done it for 93 years, and I will continue until I die or until someone finds a better way. He left. The door sealed behind him. I sat in the holding cell for another 19 hours before they came for sentencing. Not a trial, exactly. Just a declaration of verdict by a tribunal I never saw, whose members I could not name. Guilty of heretical dissemination. Guilty of violating confidentiality protocols. Guilty of sedition. Sentence execution by bolt round, carried out immediately. Body to be cremated, identity to be expunged from all records, service history to be purged. They gave me 30 minutes to compose final words if I wished. I used a data slate provided by a guard who looked barely old enough to serve, his hands steady despite his youth. I wrote this testimony, not for publication, not for dissemination, but for record. Because if the truth must exist somewhere, if evidence must be preserved even when it serves no purpose, then my testimony deserves the same preservation as Alaric's journal. To whoever finds this, if anyone finds this, if this testimony survives the purge that will attempt to erase it, I am not a hero. I am not a martyr. I am a man who discovered truth and could not bear complicity. My refusal changes nothing. The system will continue. The purges will continue. The Imperium will function exactly as designed. But I will die as myself, not as the instrument the system required me to become. I think often about Alaric in these final minutes. He refused to continue. He chose martyrdom over complicity. The Imperium declared him a saint anyway, erased his refusal, transformed his defiance into another tool of the system he opposed. Perhaps they will do the same to me. Perhaps in 7,000 years, some archivist will catalog my testimony and discover that my execution was reframed as glorious martyrdom, that my refusal was rewritten as faithful service. Perhaps the system's capacity for transforming dissent into mythology is itself the most damning evidence of its nature. Or perhaps not. Perhaps I will simply be erased, forgotten, unmourned. Perhaps this testimony will be destroyed along with my body. Perhaps the only lasting consequence of my choice will be the brief suffering of those who received my transmission and now carry the same burden I carried. I do not know which outcome is worse. The guard has informed me that my time is complete. They are coming now. I can hear the boots in the corridor, the familiar rhythm of Imperial efficiency. I have perhaps 90 seconds remaining. I want to use them for something profound, some final wisdom that justifies the choice I made. But I have no wisdom. I have only questions that have no answers. Was Alaric right to refuse? Was Yolan right to continue? Was the Inquisitor right that the alternative is worse? Is the system's survival worth its cost? Is humanity's continuation worth the mountains of corpses required to maintain it? Can truth have value even when it changes nothing? Is choosing death over complicity an act of conscience or an act of cowardice? A refusal to bear the burden that someone must bear? I do not know. I will die not knowing. Perhaps that is the only honest ending possible. They are at the door now. I can see their shadows through the viewing port. The lock is cycling. The door is opening. A commissar enters, bolt pistol in hand, the Imperial Aquila gleaming on his breast. Behind him, the young guard who gave me this data slate, his face carefully blank. Behind him, two others whose faces I do not recognize. The commissar speaks the standard formula, the words that condemn and explain and justify. Matthias Kane, you have been found guilty of heresy against the Imperium and sentenced to execution. In the name of the Emperor, justice is served. In his name, your sin is erased. In his name, may your death serve as warning to those who would stray from righteousness. Have you final words? I look at him, at this man who will end my life with practiced efficiency, who will sleep tonight and wake tomorrow and continue serving the system that requires my death. I think about Alaric's final journal entry, his hope that someone would find it and understand. I think about Yolan, still cataloging in Gallery Theta, preserving truth while participating in horror. I think about the Inquisitor, shaking hands signing execution warrants, choosing lesser horror because someone must. I think about the millions who died in purges designed to maintain control, whose last moments were probably similar to mine, facing similar efficiency, asking similar questions. Yes, I say. I have final words. The commissar nods. Speak them. I served faithfully for 19 years. I loved the Imperium. I believed every prayer I recited. I was not corrupted by chaos. I was not influenced by Xenos. I was not weak or doubtful or treasonous. I was awakened. And in the Imperium, that is unforgivable. I meet his eyes, looking for recognition, for understanding, for some flicker of humanity behind duty's mask. The system you serve is not corrupted. It is functioning exactly as designed. That is the horror you must carry. You are not preventing evil. You are implementing it. And you will continue implementing it long after I am dead, because someone must, because the alternative is perceived as worse, because 10,000 years of precedent have made calculated atrocity seem like necessity. He listens without expression. When I finish, he raises the bolt pistol. In the Emperor's name, he says. I close my eyes. I think about the cold air of Gallery Theta. I think about the journals I cataloged, the truth I preserved, the faith I lost. I think about Alaric, dead 7,000 years, his refusal erased and rewritten. I think about my sister, who lives on a manufacturum world, who will never know what happened to me, who still believes the Imperium is righteous. I think about the Emperor, dying slowly on a throne of gold, his will interpreted by those who claim to serve him. His silence used to justify any horror. I hear the bolt pistol discharge. I feel nothing, and then I feel nothing forever. I am dead now. I have been dead for 17 hours by the time this testimony is discovered, recovered from the data slate's encrypted core by a technician processing evidence, hidden among standard execution documentation, overlooked because it seemed routine until someone actually read it. That someone is you, reading this now. However long after my death you exist. Days, months, years, millennia. The specific time span does not matter. What matters is that you are reading this, which means the truth survived, which means some small purpose was served by my refusal, or perhaps not. Perhaps you are reading this and thinking what the Inquisitor thought, that truth without power is just cruelty, that revelation without revolution is just suffering, that I died for nothing and accomplished nothing and spread only the same burden I carried. Perhaps you are correct. Perhaps he was correct. Perhaps futile martyrdom is just another form of complicity, a refusal to bear the burden that someone must bear, an abdication of responsibility dressed up as moral conviction. I do not know. I died not knowing. You must decide for yourself what my choice means, what Alaric's refusal accomplished, what Yolan's continuation cost her, what the Inquisitor's burden weighs. You must decide whether the Imperium's survival justifies its methodology, whether calculated terror is necessary evil or simply evil, whether humanity requires this system or has simply convinced itself that no alternative exists. I cannot answer those questions. I can only testify to what I discovered, what I chose, what it cost me. The rest is for you to determine. Act according to conscience. Question according to reason. Serve according to faith, if you still have faith after reading this. Or refuse according to principle, if principle seems worth the cost. But remember this, I was not corrupted. I was not weak. I was not heretical. I was awake, and the Imperium executed me for it. That fact more than any theology or doctrine or philosophy, should tell you what the system truly values. Not faith, not loyalty, not service, obedience. Unquestioning, absolute, perpetual obedience. The moment you question, you become a threat. The moment you understand, you must be eliminated. Because the system cannot survive comprehension. It requires faith built on carefully maintained ignorance. It requires service unburdened by knowledge of what that service accomplishes. Alaric understood this 7,000 years ago. Yolan understood it 29 years before my death. The Inquisitor understood it for 93 years before I met him. Now you understand it. The question is what you do with that understanding. I chose refusal. I chose death over complicity. I chose to die as myself rather than transform into what the system required. I do not know if that choice was righteous or foolish, brave or cowardly, meaningful or futile. I only know it was mine. I made it with open eyes, with full knowledge of its cost, with acceptance of its consequences. What will you choose? The answer to that question is not mine to provide. I have given you what I can: testimony, evidence, truth preserved despite the system's attempt to erase it. The rest is yours to bear, yours to carry, yours to resolve according to conscience, or duty, or faith, or principle, or survival instinct. I was Matthias Cain. I served as archivist, 4th rank, in the reliquary archives of Subsector Obscurus for 19 years. I cataloged 743 Saint dossiers. I authenticated 10,000 relics. I loved my work. I believed my faith. I was complicit in a system designed to rule through terror. I awakened to that complicity. I refused to continue, and the Imperium executed me for that refusal. This is my testimony. This is my choice. This is my ending. May you never face the same choice. Or if you do, may you have the clarity I lacked, the certainty I lost, the faith I can no longer offer. May you sleep better than Yolan slept, better than the Inquisitor slept, better than I would have slept had I chosen complicity. May you find some way to serve the Emperor without serving the horror his name is used to justify. Or may you refuse, as I refused, and die as yourself, rather than as the instrument others require you to become. Either way, you now carry what I carried. The burden is yours now. I am dead. I am at peace. I am beyond the choice. You are not. Choose well, or choose poorly. But choose according to truth, not comfortable lies. That much, at least, I can ask of you. That much Alaric asked of whoever would find his journal. That much we both demand of those who come after: see clearly, understand completely, and then act according to conscience rather than convenience. The Emperor protects, they say. But who protects us from the Emperor's servants? I do not know. I died not knowing. Perhaps you will discover the answer I could not. Perhaps not. Either way, the truth exists now. You have read it. You have understood it. You cannot unlearn what you know. You cannot return to faith once you have seen what faith serves. You can only choose how you carry the weight of that knowledge. I chose my way. Alaric chose his. Yolan chose hers. The Inquisitor chose his. Now you must choose yours. I have nothing more to say. The testimony is complete. My life is complete. My choice is made and executed. What remains is only silence, cold archival silence. The preservation of truth that changes nothing but exists anyway, because existence itself is sometimes the only victory possible. I was Matthias Cain. I was awake. I refused. I died. Remember me, or forget me. But remember the truth I died for. That is all I ask. That is all anyone should ask. That is enough.